Thank you for joining us. I'm Zoe Lenkiewicz, Senior Technical Advisor and Head of Communications at WasteAid. As part of our preparation for the COP26 United Nations Climate Change Summit in Glasgow, we've invited a range of thought leaders to discuss the role of waste management in climate mitigation. Please do explore the articles at wasteaid.org/COP26. One of the thought pieces within our Waste and Climate Hub is from Professor David Wilson, who I'm very pleased to be speaking with today. Professor Wilson has been an international waste and resource management consultant for more than 40 years and a visiting professor at Imperial College London for the last 20. He's been lead author for seminal publications, including the United Nations Habitat's Solid Waste Management in the World's Cities from 2009 and UNEP and ISWA's Global Waste Management Outlook in 2015. He was the 2017-18 president of CRWM, the UK professional body for resources and waste, and is a patron of WasteAid. So thank you very much for joining us today, David.
A pleasure, Zoe.
Thank you. So thank you as well for contributing your very interesting and informative article to the WasteAid Waste and Climate Hub. Just to remind the listeners, that's at wasteaid.org/COP26. Your article discusses the contribution of the waste and recycling sector to mitigating climate change and draws attention to the fact that many of the existing assumptions and data are incomplete. Waste management is explicitly included within the IPCC figures, but it comes out as a relatively small component. Now, you're suggesting that's not the whole figure. Please, could you explain?
Yeah, I mean, waste management is often perceived as a bit part player in climate mitigation. The definitive IPCC fifth assessment report estimated the waste sector's contribution to global carbon dioxide equivalent emissions as just 3 to 5% in 2010. But that headline figure is quite misleading. If you're doing any accounting, it is very necessary to make sure that everything is nicely boxed up in little compartments. And waste management is one of 10 or so high-level categories that the economy is divided into for the purposes of carbon accounting. And it's focused very much on end-of-pipe waste management. But modern waste management focuses first in the waste hierarchy on reduce, reuse, recycle. And all of those save huge amounts of embedded carbon in products and materials, which you don't need to put in to make them new if you're reusing, recycling, or indeed if you don't make it in the first place. But those savings don't come to the waste sector, which is just the end of pipe cleaning up the mess bit. They are credited to the industries that produce the things in the first place, the metals, plastics, paper, food industry, etc., etc. But even if you take just the waste sector, the 2010 figure is still low. 90% of that figure comes from methane, which is produced from the anaerobic digestion of food and other organic putrescible waste in landfill. And in 2010, when that figure was produced, more than half of the total municipal solid waste in the world still came from the global north. That figure is now sort of going down steadily. And in the north, we started collecting and controlling methane from landfill back in the 1970s when I started out on my career. But if you look at the UK's recent climate budget report as an example, in 1990, the waste sector accounted for 90 million tons carbon dioxide equivalent emissions out of a total of 890. So that in the UK in 1990, after 20 years of controlling and capturing methane, we had 10% of emissions came from the narrowly defined waste sector. By 2010, by a mixture of better capture and control and diversion from landfill, recycling, reduction, etc., that 90 million tonnes had gone down to 41 million tonnes. So that's almost 50 million tonnes reduction. And that the total had gone down from 900 to 700. So the reduction in total was 200 million tonnes, of which the waste sector, just looking narrowly at the methane bit, accounted for 25% of those reductions. So already the sector, even though it's a relatively small proportion, has contributed hugely to mitigation. But a lot of that mitigation came from diversion, from food waste reduction, which saves, means you don't have to produce the food that we don't eat in the first place. And WRAP have recently estimated the carbon implications of food that we throw away in the UK as 35 million tonnes a year, which is about the same as the current contribution of the waste sector in total. And for recycling, it has been estimated that the waste which we recycle save 45 million tonnes of carbon a year, which is way more than the waste sector in total, to the further up the economy, because you don't need so much energy to produce the aluminium, to produce the plastics, etc. And all of those figures from the three parts of the waste sector itself, the recycling and contribution to the wider economy, and waste prevention, just focusing only on food waste, but there's all sorts of other things that we're trying to prevent as well. Each of those figures works out at somewhere between 5 and 10% of the current UK total carbon emissions. And so that's one aspect. One thing that doesn't even come into that is the emissions from open burning of waste. In the 2010 IPCC figures, or IPCC report, open burning was recognized as a significant source, but it wasn't included in the quantification because nobody recognizes open burning, it isn't measured, the data doesn't exist, and if the data isn't good enough, the IPCC can't include it. So it's a catch-22. Because of that, one of my PhD students at Imperial College, Natalia Rayner, spent 5 years researching the emissions from open burning of waste, with a focus on her home country of Mexico. And our estimates, using still lots of approximations, but better estimates of emissions of black carbon, which is one of the, alongside methane, is another of the short-lived climate forces focused on by IPCC. Our estimate was that open burning, mainly in developing countries, contributes of itself between 2 and 10% of global emissions. Very wide range because of the still poor data, particularly on how prevalent is open burning. So if we, especially when that is added into the mix, in the UK, with open burning long having gone in 1990, just methane from landfill, from waste management, was giving 10% of the total figure. So the 3 to 5% from IPCC, if you look at waste coming increasingly from developing countries who haven't yet brought their waste under control, then a figure of 10% seems to me to be much more reasonable. Let's be conservative and make that 5 to 10%. And so that's from waste management. From recycling, it's a similar 5 to 10%. From prevention, it's a similar 5 to 10%. And those three things together is what we now call waste and resource management. We're trying to move towards the circular economy. You add those three lots of 5 to 10% together, it becomes even more uncertain. IPCC hate uncertainty, but in the sixth assessment report, they add to each number an indication of confidence levels in that. And whether the overall number, when you add 5 to 10% three times, whether that number is 15%, 20%, or even higher, frankly, that is immaterial. We have high confidence that that number is significant. If you want to push me, I would say maybe 15 to 20% as an order of magnitude, but it is a significant number, and better waste and resource management needs to be on the COP26 agenda.
Thank you, David. It's really interesting to hear your estimations of the impact of waste and resource management. I think that often our sector is considered as a vertical industry like many others, but in reality, we're very much a horizontal one, not only helping other industries reduce their waste and recycle their waste, but also then providing that recycled feedstock into their manufacturing processes. So it's really not as simple, is it, as putting waste and resource management into one small box.
That's right.
And interesting what you were saying about lower income countries as well, which does seg nicely into my next question for you, which is focusing on lower and middle income countries. Where do you think the priority should be for policymakers and, importantly, climate finance going forwards?
Okay, waste management is often the Cinderella, the forgotten part of sustainable development, of environmental protection, and in this context of climate mitigation. The solutions to, in the Global Waste Management Outlook, we estimated that around a third of the world's population do not have their wastes collected at all. And even if the wastes are collected, much of it goes to uncontrolled dumping and open burning. And much of the uncollected waste, if your waste isn't collected, you have to do something with it. And the simplest thing to do with it is set it on fire. So the baseline, the cheapest option from the point of view of the local community with no budget, whatever, is dumping and burning. Open burning has a major impact on climate. Dumping is the major source of plastics entering the ocean. Other work suggests that if you extend collection to everyone and eliminate uncontrolled dumping and open burning, you would, at a stroke, reduce the source term, the amount of the mass of plastics entering the ocean, by 50% or more a year. Now, those are both things which have a huge global impact. The costs fall to the poorest. The benefits are largely for the rest of the world through reducing, through climate mitigation and reducing plastics in the ocean. So to me, there is an obligation on the global north, OECD, whatever term you want to use for it, to put their money where their mouth is, and to make sure that finance is getting to the right place. And financing extension of waste collection, upgrading services to the level of controlled disposal, eliminating burning and uncontrolled dumping, is a low-hanging fruit. We know what to do, we know how to do it, we're lacking the funds and the political will to do it. So my message is, focus on that. It will give you returns across a whole range of SDGs, including climate mitigation. And this absolutely needs to be within the scope of climate finance, which currently it is marginal whether or not this would actually be seen as a climate finance issue. And my point is it absolutely has to be.
Thanks, David. Yeah, completely agree. I mean, we were looking at, which lower income countries have managed to include waste management in their nationally determined contributions. And what we found was that because there is no internationally agreed methodology for estimating climate emissions from open burning, it's very difficult, therefore, to get that, to get targets into your climate strategy as a nation, and therefore, almost impossible to attract climate finance to support the extension of waste collection services to everyone, as you were saying. And of course, the impacts of the open dumping and open burning, it's not just climate emissions and marine plastic pollution, but it's also the significant public health impact of open burning. Much of the open burning that takes place on a domestic level is carried out by young women of childbearing age. They've quite often got a baby in their belly, another strapped around their waist, and some toddlers around their knees. And there they are burning their rubbish to get rid of it, because that's the best way. If no one's going to take it away, what other options do you have? So we very much see climate mitigation through waste management very much tied in with that public health benefit, which is really significant, isn't it?
Absolutely. And the recent sixth assessment report, was both a major step forward and a major disappointment in my view. A major step forward in that they did include open burning of waste, as a category, but the data that they used was still weak and fairly old, and by when they fed it in with much other sources of open burning of black carbon emissions from wildfires, from biomass burning in general, from cooking and domestic heating. Again, the measurement is not there, but they had fairly comprehensive methodology for estimation, which was not the case for open burning of waste. And of all the sources there, there were four main sources. Open burning of waste came in as the fourth and came in at 9% of the total from of black carbon emissions. And the rule of thumb that they appear to have been using was anything that's 10% or more is significant and gets carried forward to the high-level reports. So open burning has vanished. Again, if you dig, you find it. If you read the high-level reports, it isn't there. But whether it's 9%, 11%, 15%, it is an important factor. It may be a lot more than we think it is, and it is a relatively low-hanging fruit. We know exactly what needs to be done. It's relatively easy to do it. Let's just get on and do it, and it will make a difference.
Thanks. Yeah, completely agree. And really interesting that I think global aviation is understood to generate about 5% of climate emissions, and yet so much climate finance is going on decarbonising aviation, whereas open burning alone is almost double that, give or take, and yet much more difficult to attract finance to.
Yeah, I think the figure for open burning, our estimate from Natalia's research was 2 to 10%. Given some of the AR6 report is actually reducing it's both increasing and reducing the significance of black carbon. It's quite complicated things to do with absorption of sunlight, which offsets the whatever. So I think it's towards the the lower end of that scale would be my my estimate. But they're saying 9% of the contribution of black carbon, and black carbon, I'm not sure they put a figure on it, but it's of the order of 10% of total emissions is black carbon, 30-odd% is methane, 60% is carbon dioxide, and very off the top of my head rough numbers. They've gone away in the report from giving us easy numbers to plug into equations to come up with answers. It's all much more complicated, they tell us, which is fair enough. But but even if if we could reduce emissions by 1 or 2% by eliminating open burning, it would make a significant difference. And the short-lived climate forces, particularly black carbon, because it is very short-lived, it gives you a short-term hit. In the by 2100, it's it doesn't make a lot of difference. But if what we're trying to do is to reduce emissions up to 2030, up to 2040, in order to buy time for the more expensive, more difficult things you mentioned, decarbonising aviation, then let's go for the short-term hits. And open burning of waste is one of them.
Absolutely, yeah. Waste collection is, a very simple climate mitigation approach, isn't it?
And it's a very effective public health measure,
yes,
as you say.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you, David. Final question then for you, please. What would be your overriding message to government leaders and those working on climate finance at COP26?
Both bigger picture and and my more partisan picture. The bigger picture is we have to do something. We have to do a lot, and we have to do it now. So please knock your heads together and give us a decent, an aggressive, ambitious, which is going to, which means that I can actually talk about these issues to my 7-year-old, 10-year-old grandchildren without them covering their ears and saying, "Don't talk to me about it, I'm too scared." So that's the big picture. In terms of what we're talking about here, waste and resource management is a cross-cutting issue, particularly in developing countries. We can make a lot of difference. We can make impacts across the whole range of SDGs, particularly climate change, particularly reducing plastics in the ocean, by simple measures of extending collection to all and eliminating uncontrolled dumping and open burning. Part of the solution is recycling, particularly through the informal building on what already exists in developing countries, the informal sector. Part of it is through reducing food waste, etc., which has knock-on effects elsewhere. So it's a point of entry. The impact of the sector itself in the narrow accounting terms is quite small, but as an entry point in getting considerable reductions, 15 to 20%, I think is achievable, or is the sort of, at least 15 to 20% is the total contribution. It enables action across that, and that is worth having, and it has to be on the COP26 agenda, and it needs to be part of every country's nationally determined contribution. And it's not just developing countries in the global north. We're moving towards a circular economy, and as other things become more difficult, we have already, the waste sector has already contributed 25% of UK reductions up to 2010. The that's been slowing down, but we can continue to make significant contributions by focusing on recycling, reuse, reduction, reuse, recycling, and the circular economy.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Professor David Wilson, for sharing your insights with us here today. Irrefutable evidence there, and clearly the waste and resources sector has a huge huge potential, especially with the low-hanging fruit that you're talking about in lower income countries where the majority of people still don't have their waste collected. So we're at WasteAid, we are continuing to do our best to bring attention to this subject in the lead up to COP26, and of course COP27 will be in Africa. So we're planning to keep the momentum going between now and then. So thank you once again to the listeners. Thank you for joining us. And if you'd like more information, please do visit us at wasteaid.org/COP26 to see to read more articles from a wide range of thought leaders and to understand more about the role of the waste and resources sector in climate mitigation. So thank you once again.
Thank you, Zoe.